Hey guys, Dino at Speed Circuit here, and today I just wanted to do a quick guide on how to do an e-tune with us at speedcircuit.net. Now, the car today that we're tuning is a 2011 Evo X GSR, and we're going to be tuning it with ECUFlash and logging with EvoScan using our Tactrix cable. So first, you have to log on to our website and order an e-tune from us with the appropriate options. It's very important that you list all of your engine modifications properly, from your intake to your injectors and all of that, to see if they require scaling and whatnot. Now, we'll talk about scaling, and then we'll talk about power tuning, and there are two different modes of tuning. The only time you're going to need scaling is if you change something significant in your fuel system, or you change the size of your MAF housing. So if you have an intake that retains a stock plastic MAF housing, you're not going to need MAF scaling. So if we have to do any kind of scaling, whether it's injector scaling, MAF scaling, map sensor scaling, or what have you, we're going to have to do a bunch of logs and corrections for calibration before we do any power pulls or power tuning at all. I cannot urge that enough. If we are in the calibration phase of our e-tuning, you cannot go into boost. You can damage the motor. It's a lot of risk. The reason being is that if the ECU is not properly calibrated to the hardware you have in your car, meaning the injectors, the map sensor, the MAF housing, etc., then when you go into boost, you're not going to have the proper air-fuel ratio numbers, and you're not going to be hitting the proper load values. So the timing numbers you're getting from the ECU and the fueling numbers you're getting from the ECU are probably not going to be right. And if they are too aggressive, you could damage the engine permanently, and you do not want to do that. So if you are in the calibration phase of a tune, you got to just drive easy, drive like a grandma, and keep it outside of boost. You could rev it up a bit, that's fine. You could go 4,000, 5,000 RPM, but you have to keep the engine outside of boost. So the first thing you have to do is to download the attachment I send you via email. And on your Windows PC, you're going to need ECUFlash installed. And then you're going to go ahead and click the Open ROM button here and select the file that I sent you. Now there's going to be version numbers right here that will increment as we go on. So everything should load up fine. And now we need to go ahead and flash this to the car. So in order to flash it to the car, you're going to need a USB cable and a Tactrix cable, also available on our website. And you're going to plug it into the OBD port on the car in order to be able to communicate with the ECU. So once that's plugged in, you're going to have to turn your car to the on position, but not let it start up or run. And you're going to come over here to the icon that says currently loaded ROM into ECU's flash memory, and it looks like a red arrow pointing to a chip, the chip being the ECU. And you're going to go ahead and click on that and hit OK. And now if you look at your screen on your dashboard there, you'll see it's going through a lot of different error messages, and that's okay. The ECU is just getting its brain scrambled, and essentially it doesn't know what's going on, so don't worry about it. It's totally normal. You're going to pop-up message that says ECUFlash success, and you'll hit OK. From there, you go ahead and shut the car off, wait a few seconds, and start the car back up. Now, in the event that the flash fails in the middle of flashing, do not shut the car off. Just contact us and we'll try to help you. Now, on the other side of things, if you're using a Cobb Accessport, the process is very similar, but instead of using ECUFlash, you're going to be using Cobb Accessport, and you're going to flash using your handheld unit directly to the car. So this is EvoScan. This is going to work on your car whether you're using ECUFlash or if you're using Cobb Accessport. However, if you're using an Accessport, there is a built-in logger that you can use and you don't have to pay for this program, which I think is around $25. Anyway, one of the first things you have to verify is you have to make sure that from this drop-down window you have the correct ECU configured in order to do the logging. So for instance, if you choose the wrong one, let's go with Golden 2008 version 2 Evo 10, and I go ahead and click on that to log, you're going to see that the numbers just don't make sense. It says the RPM is 100, the barometer is 0. You know, that's impossible. So we're going to stop that.
Link disengaged.
And then we're going to come over here and say, oh, well, I have a 2011, so let's try 2011 USDM version 3. This is a USDM car, so let's see what happens.
Link engaged.
Okay, so this looks right at first because we have about 700 RPM, which is matching what we have there on the tachometer. But the barometer is reading 9.8 PSI, and a few other numbers look like they're a little bit off. Injector pulse width is 0.128, and that's not right. So there's a few things that maybe aren't right. So we're going to try another one.
Link disengaged.
So we'll try version 1 this time.
Link engaged.
Well, this one's definitely wrong because we're not doing 62 RPM, and that number isn't changing, right? If I rev, say that number doesn't change. So we know that it's not 2011 version 1.
Link disengaged.
So we'll stop that. So let's try version 2 for a 2011, which is probably going to be the one that works considering this car is a 2011.
Link engaged.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So we're a little over 700 RPM. We're going to rev it. Look at that. We got over 2,000, which matches the tachometer. The barometric pressure is around 15 PSI, which in general, if you're at sea level, it should be, you know, mid to high 14s. And it's negative 9 PSI, which makes sense. We got 0 knock counts, which makes sense because the car is not knocking. Throttle position sensor is reading 10%. And then if I floor it, you know, it jumps up, so that's good. All the other numbers kind of make sense. So it's safe to say that we are using the correct logging parameters here.
Link disengaged.
So now that we got the proper logging parameters figured out, we need to also make sure we can log the wideband sensor. So this car here doesn't have an external input set up for a wideband sensor. Normally we will have a gauge that has a serial output, and it will allow us to connect to a serial to USB adapter, which will hook up to a COM port, and then we would go over here to this menu and choose the correct COM port, which is going to vary on every computer. It could be COM3, COM4, COM5, and essentially you'll see the wideband data come in, assuming that you select the correct wideband sensor from this list. And then you're going to enable logging that wideband sensor by checking this box here, external wideband. In this particular car, we have the wideband sensor set up through the rear O2 sensor wire. And there's an equation down here you could put in. You might have to edit your XML yourself to add that in, but essentially it should be able to log the output of the wideband sensor over the rear O2 wire and have it integrated into the logs. Now, whenever you log the wideband sensor, it's important to make sure that whatever the sensor output is that's being logged matches what the gauge itself reads. If there is any discrepancy, let me know, and we'll find a solution from there. But if you're sending me wideband data that says that we're running 10.5 to 1 air-fuel ratio, and in reality we're running a 13 to 1 air-fuel ratio, that could be very dangerous. So we need to correct that before it's a problem, and we need to make sure that within a tenth or so that the gauge itself mirrors what we're seeing in the logs, or else we could have a disaster on our hands. So we want to make sure everything's right and everything's accurate and everything's safe. Since I'm not going to be tuning your car in person, I'm not going to be able to pick up on things that I would notice if I were there in person. So essentially you're my eyes and ears, and we need to make sure that whatever information you're getting to me is accurate, and you have to be observant while we're doing the process, because if something funny happens and I'm not there to witness it or experience it myself, I need you to be aware of what's going on, so that way if there's any kind of issue, we can deal with that and try to find a solution. Now, if we're doing any kind of MAF scaling, it's important to make sure that we have certain parameters marked. And what you're going to do is you're going to drive around a bit. You're going to log MAF volts, short-term fuel trim, long-term fuel trim idle, long-term fuel trim cruise, and long-term fuel trim in use. Those are very important to log. Also, you're going to want to log load, and you're going to drive the car around easy. You're going to vary your RPM, and we're going to get a good data collection so I can run my numbers on that and essentially come up with a good scaling for your MAF sensor. Now, if we are doing injector scaling or fuel system scaling, the only thing I need is a quick log of the fuel trims after a bit of miles. You're going to want to put at least 50 miles on a car before you send me the data, because it doesn't really get settled until you drive it around a lot. But essentially all I need you to do here is to check all the fuel trim boxes in the EvoScan logger, do a quick log.
Link engaged. Link disengaged.
And it could just be a second long. I just need a snapshot of these numbers, and you can go ahead and send me that log. Okay, so once all the calibration is complete, I will ask you to do some wide open throttle pulls. The first couple pulls I'll ask you to do are going to be at a lower RPM in a lower gear. I'll ask you to use second gear just because the load is lower, and if there's any kind of issue, it's less likely to cause a problem in second gear. If you're in an SST equipped car, I'm going to ask you to make sure that you are in super sport mode anytime we're doing any kind of pulls. It's important to be in super sport mode because it'll give the best clamping force on the clutches and will give you the least amount of slip. So that's really important in order to get the job done properly. It's also important, before we even start this tuning process, to make sure that the car is mechanically sound, that it doesn't have any mechanical issues, clutch slipping, boost leaks, all that kind of stuff, in order to make sure that the car is running properly. I've had many situations in the past where the car would have a mechanical issue and the customer would ask me to tune around it, and I won't do that because that's not the right way to do things. You have to fix the mechanical issue, and then we could tune the car as good as possible. So make sure your car is fully sorted out before starting the tuning process. And even if you think it's right, I really advise you to do a boost leak test or at least a smoke test in order to verify you don't have any leaks in the system, because if there are leaks in the system, we might have to go back to square one and start all over again, and unfortunately I'll have to charge you for that because it takes more time. So you want to make sure that the car is mechanically sound and has zero issues before we start this process. If I do feel that there is issues with the car, I will let you know as we go. A lot of times as a tuner, there are certain issues that I could pick up on just by viewing the logs, and just my experience with different platforms has given me the insight to kind of look at numbers and know that something's not quite right, because the numbers are not what I expect them to be. So once the car is properly calibrated and running correctly and has enough miles on it to be sure that it doesn't have any drivability issues, it's time to do the fun part, and we get to do some power tuning. So let's go. So you're gonna go ahead and load up EvoScan for power tuning for logging purposes, and make sure you have everything checked that I instruct you to log, which is going to be listed on the website. Now, whether we're doing an e-tune for an Evo or a Porsche or whatever, they're going to have different variables that I want logged. And while the process for the different cars and the different tuning platforms, whether we're using ECUFlash / EvoScan or Cobb Accessport or anything else, the tools might be different, but the basic ideas will still apply. So if you're using EvoScan, one thing I like to do is I like to come over here and mouse over the Start Data Logger button here. And I like to press it and then drag away from it. This way, if you see the blue highlight around that box, that shows you that that button is selected. So if we hit the space bar,
link engaged, link disengaged,
it will begin or stop the logger. It'll toggle the logger off or on, so that way you don't have to fool around with a mouse while you're trying to drive. Now, it is also very important that you do this in Mexico, because their rules there are very lax compared to the US. It is also very important that you're doing this on a road that is not populated and is pretty level. So as long as the road is level and relatively smooth and not populated, then that's a good area to be in. You just don't want to be in a situation where there's other cars that you have to contend with, or you're in a residential area and it's dangerous. You want to be kind of in the middle of nowhere and somewhere safe. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do some pulls. So we're going to start by doing a second gear pull just to make sure everything's kosher. And if you notice, I have my blue box here highlighted, so that way when I hit the space bar, it'll just start logging. I'm going to go to about 6,000 RPM for this pull just to make sure everything's safe. I don't want to take it to red line yet. And then I'm going to let off the gas and hit the space bar again to end the log at the same time. So here we go on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
link
Log
engaged,
started, pull, and stop.
link disengaged,
So I'll probably have you do 2 or 3 logs in second gear on the first set of power pulls just to make sure everything's safe. And I'll probably have you limit the RPMs we're doing, just so if things aren't right, we can correct them before you take it all the way. Now, everything looked good on that set of logs. So now we're going to go ahead and do things in third gear, which we're going to hit higher loads and we'll have a better log. So this time we're going to do the same thing, but in third gear. So here we go from 3,500 RPM.
link engaged,
Start the log and go. Boost looks good, AFRs look good.
link disengaged,
And I let off the throttle and hit the space bar at the exact same time. I didn't shift, I didn't throw it neutral or anything, I just stayed in gear and I let it decelerate by itself. So we're gonna do another third gear pull here, 3,500 RPM, the red line. I'm gonna
link
begin my log, go wide open, monitor my boost and AFR, and at 7,000,
link disengaged,
let off the throttle at the same time as ending the log by hitting the spacebar. so that way we don't have any shifts in the log or anything funny like that. Now, on your car, if you have a built-up motor or something like that, I might tell you to rev higher or do something a little different, but you know, that's a case-by-case basis. In general, on a smaller turbo or a stock turbo, you're generally not going to go over 7,000 RPM. So every time I ask you to take some logs, go ahead and email them to me at your earliest convenience. And sometimes it'll take me a few days to get to them, depending on how busy I am. I work really long hours. I work like 16 hours a day. So there's going to be times when it'll take up to a week to respond. But in general, it'll take me a few days to send you an updated ROM and have you do more pulls. So generally we go back and forth at least once a week, and we continue to revise the car until it's complete, and we make sure everything's running the way it should run and making good power. So it's important to always be aware of your gauges and everything around you. You want to make sure you're not really speeding. You want to make sure your boost pressure is what it should be. You want to make sure your air-fuel ratio is in the range it should be, which depending on the car is going to be different. On an Evo, it's going to be anywhere between 10 and low 12s. On a 911, a 3-liter turbo 911, it could be anywhere from 11 to 14 would be a safe range. But you got to make sure everything's good. You got to make sure your boost is in check. All of that.
Link engaged.
So, quick third gear hit.
Link disengaged.
And the log as soon as I let off the throttle. And then you're going to go ahead and email me all these logs. So I only really want 3 logs max at the same time, because if you send me too many, it's just too much data to go through. So I definitely want more than 1. When we're doing power tuning, I really like at least 2 or 3. If we're doing calibration for fuel trims on injector scaling, I only need 1 log, and it only needs to be about a second long. You don't need to send me a log that's an hour long, because it's just more data for me to sift through. I only need to know the end result, which is just going to be a quick 1-second snapshot of what's going on, because I got to know where it settles, not where it was the whole time. So that's it in a nutshell. It's just a matter of communicating, sending me the logs that I request. The process of doing the power pulls is really important, because if you get those wrong, then it's going to look funny from what I see. And that's it. And please be patient. Like I said, I'm not able to always answer emails right away. On average, it'll take me a couple days to get a chance to review the data and formulate the new tune and send that back to you. That's normal. You should expect 1 update every week, and that should get you closer to your goal. So thanks again, and thanks for doing an e-tune with us at speedcircuit.net. And we'll be covering more cars in the future, but for now, this should be a kind of a generic template for everything that we're tuning right now, which are the 911s and the Evo 10s via e-tuning. And there'll be slight differences, but the general premise should be the same. It's just the tools you're going to use might change slightly. The Accessport is going to be a little different from what we're doing in ECUFlash, but you're just going to be doing the same thing on an Accessport handheld unit rather than using a Windows laptop and a Tactrix cable, but it's the same principle. I'm going to leave a link in the description to all of the tools and the tuning products and everything that you're going to need. And please like and subscribe and share this video to anyone else that's interested in getting an e-tune from us. Thanks again.